Thank you for joining us. For those members of the viewing audience, in 2014, the Orange County Domestic Violence Commission produced more than 60 recommendations for improvements to services for Orange County families impacted by domestic violence. This morning's news conference will share information about new domestic violence legislation spearheaded by the Commission and sponsored by Senator Simmons. Following remarks from Circuit Judge Alice Blackwell and Dick Batchelor, the co-chairs of the Mayor's Domestic Violence Commission, as well as Carol Wick, Chief Executive Officer of Harbor House, and Senator Simmons, we will open the floor to questions from the media. Judge Blackwell.
Thank you. On behalf of the Orange County Domestic Violence Commission, I want to welcome you today to this press conference. Dick Batchelor and I, as co-chairs of the commission, are very pleased to be here with other members of the Domestic Violence Commission, with members of our legislature, members of our law enforcement community, and other community partners who are so critical in the efforts of our community to eradicate domestic violence in Orange County. The Orange County Domestic Violence Commission was reconvened in 2013 by County Mayor Teresa Jacobs, then Chief Judge Belvin Perry, who's with us here today, and then Clerk of Court Lydia Gardner. The members of the commission are very diverse: domestic violence advocates, law enforcement officers, including our state attorney, representatives of the courts, our educational institutions, and others in the community with particular expertise in the field of domestic violence. The commission produced more than 60 recommendations for improvements to services for Orange County families that are impacted by domestic violence. Those recommendations were wide-ranging and significant. I'd like for a minute just to briefly highlight some of the major accomplishments of the commission to date. Harbor House, our certified domestic violence agency, and the Florida Coalition Against Domestic Violence have completed training with local law enforcement and state attorneys on the collection of evidence, including photographing injuries. We've completed training with 911 operators in Orange County to help them respond appropriately to calls from victims of domestic violence. The University of Central Florida, through its Department of Public and Allied Health, has undertaken a comprehensive review of the state attorney's records to help us determine strategies for moving forward with cases of intimate partner violence. We have new Harbor House advocates to assist victims at the earliest possible stages when they first report domestic violence. We have a new legal internship program in connection with Florida A&M College of Law to provide law student interns to assist survivors in obtaining civil domestic violence injunctions. And we've made many more improvements for families impacted by domestic violence. Today, though, we are here to talk about our most current initiative, which is the introduction of 2 new laws which will help persons who are survivors of domestic violence. I'll talk about the first bill, and then Carol Wick, Chief Executive Officer of Harbor House, will talk about the additional bill. You'll also hear from Senator David Simmons, who's sponsoring both of these bills. The first new law that we propose is a law that closes a loophole that exists when a judge orders an alleged perpetrator of domestic violence not to have any kind of contact with the survivor. What happens is that when a person is arrested for domestic violence, they go to jail. Very shortly after they arrive at the jail, they'll see a judge who sets a bond, and as a part of that bond, the judge orders the alleged perpetrator not to have any kind of contact with the victim. It's that no contact order by the court that's the subject of this new law. Before this law, the no contact order that the judge enters is a part of the bond that's set for the alleged perpetrator. It doesn't technically become effective until the perpetrator posts the bond and gets released from the jail. What happens in the real world is that before the perpetrator is released from the jail, he or she can begin to make lots of phone calls to the victim, to the family of the victim, to his or her own family, and to anyone else to try to harass the victim survivor into dropping the charges or try to intimidate the victim survivor. What this new law will do is that it will make the judge's no contact order effective immediately, even while the defendant's in jail. It'll cut off the ability of the perpetrator to make phone calls, text, or send any other kind of written communication, either directly or indirectly, to the victim survivor, and it'll protect victims from threats of harassment that start almost immediately upon arrest of a perpetrator. The law also makes it a misdemeanor, punishable by up to a year in the jail for each violation of the no contact order. The members of the Domestic Violence Commission thank Senator David Simmons, as well as State Representatives Mike Miller and Holly Rasheen for sponsoring this legislation. It is critical to the safety of survivors of domestic violence, as well as being critical to the integrity of the judicial process for hearing domestic violence cases. And now I'll invite Carol Wick, CEO of Harbor House, to tell you about the additional new law that we're proposing.
Thank you, Judge Blackwell. Many of you may be familiar with the use of electronic monitoring, such as GPS-enabled ankle monitors, for offenders who are on probation or even on pretrial release. The next proposed piece of legislation seeks to close a very serious loophole in this law. Currently, it's a third-degree felony to cut off your GPS electronic monitoring device or any electronic monitoring device, but only if the offender is part of that order is part of community control. If it takes place as part of a pretrial release or even during the civil injunction process, the judge has to then receive information from law enforcement, issue a warrant, and then law enforcement can arrest. If the electronic monitor, including the GPS, is placed by anyone other than corrections under current law, that warrant process has to happen and can take a long time. This not only causes confusion, but is actually very, very dangerous. The new legislation will make it a third-degree felony to cut off or tamper with any electronic monitoring device, regardless of which judge issues the order that it be placed on the offendant, or at any process, either civil or criminal. That makes the process much safer, and that's a great thing. We'd like to thank Representative Torres for sponsoring this legislation along with Senator Simmons. And I'd also like to recognize former Chief Judge Belvin Perry for helping us draft this legislation and get this into place. As advocates, both of these bills are very critical to the safety of not only domestic abuse survivors, but any person who's a victim of crime where the offender still poses a threat. We can continue to put the burden of protection on the victims, or if these bills are passed, we will allow the system to protect victims of crime from those who want to continue to harm them despite a court order for them to stop. They allow the enforcement of a judge's order from the moment that order is made, and they allow law enforcement and the state attorney's office to act. And very simply, they protect survivors of violent crime and hold offenders responsible. On behalf of Harbor House of Central Florida, the Domestic Violence Commission, and all of the survivors in the state of Florida, we want to thank everyone who has worked with us, especially Senator Simmons, who this is the second year we're trying to pass this piece of legislation. We wanted to have a survivor here today to talk about their experience with GPS monitoring or with an offender who violated no contact order. But frankly, the 4 people that we talked to felt it was just much, much too dangerous for them to speak in public. These are offenders who violate court orders. These are offenders who don't care, and they're the most dangerous. They're the people who are often held without bond, which is why they're making those phone calls from jail. This is such critical legislation to close these 2 loopholes, and I just really want to thank the work of the Commission, Dick Batchelor, Judge Blackwell, and everyone else who's had part of this. With that, I'd like to turn it back over to Dick Batchelor, co-chair.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you for pointing out so vividly the need for this legislation. Also, Judge Blackwell. It is my pleasure to introduce Senator David Simmons. I mean, let me just say this about David. I've known him for a great number of years. We won't count the years, David, but I've known him for a number of years. But the good thing about that is when I went to Senator Simmons about these 2 issues, he was extraordinarily receptive to it and wants to do something about it. So we're very, very pleased. First of all, let me thank Representative Torres again for sponsoring the 1 piece of legislation in the House. But I'd like to introduce to you Senator David Simmons, who's agreed to sponsor both pieces of legislation. Senator Simmons. Thank you again.
Good morning, and I want to say to the Commission, congratulations on the work that you have done and also on the work that you're going to be doing. I look forward to working with you on these 2 pieces of legislation. When Dick Batchelor contacted me and voiced the concerns that exist regarding the deficiencies in the existing law, I said to him that I would do what I can to assure that this passes the Senate, and certainly working with my colleagues in the House, Representative Torres and others, that we will endeavor to get this passed so that we can meet the deficiencies and correct the deficiencies that exist in our existing law. Again, I look forward to working with you, and we'll, I'm sure, be seeing a lot of each other over the next 60 days.
Thank you. We'd be glad to take any questions now. You can certainly direct them to whoever you'd like to.
This would be for Carol Wick. While everyone up there is working to protect the victims of domestic violence, if there was anything that you can say to those victims, what would it be?
Well, I think that they need to hear that people really are concerned, that it's important for people to know that there are loopholes like this that make it very difficult. Right now, if you have a perpetrator in jail, you have to go get a civil injunction sometimes to get him to stop calling you from jail. And we shouldn't put a burden, an extra burden, on someone who's experienced trauma. It's just not fair. So we're working for you. All of these people are working for you. And actually, the no contact bill came out of Jeff Ashton's office as a recommendation. It takes time to get things like this changed, but change is happening, and I think that's a really good thing.
Also for you, Carol, over the years we all know there's been a lot of cooperation, a lot of communication between every department up there, including Harvard House and sheriff's departments and everything else. Does this take it to the next level now that you're able to have that quicker communication, quicker response?
Absolutely. We are now, our pilot has been in place since November to have, at the scene of the 911 call, survivors connected with Harbor House immediately. That's had an incredible impact, from about a 10% acceptance rate of services when we contact them 24 to 48 hours later to a 95% acceptance service rate. So we know that that's working really well. We've now completed the first round of 911 operator training, working with the Sheriff's Office, OPD, and Apopka PD. We're working with the State Attorney's Office. All of the systems are really, really working hard together to try to collect the evidence that we need to collect, make the system much more responsive, make it much easier on those that have suffered at the hands of their intimate partner, and really try to hold those who are committing these offenses and making this an unsafe community, making them very accountable.
Time is of the utmost importance when it comes to this.
It absolutely is. I mean, just that, being able to contact that person and have communication with them immediately before the perpetrator is able to have a contact, or the perpetrator's family or cohorts, is critically important in making sure that that person is safe.
Do you think the potential legislation could help save lives in Central Florida?
I have no doubt that this will save lives. I think that what both of these pieces of legislation will do will encourage people to cooperate more fully with the State Attorney's Office and allow them to do their jobs better. I think also the GPS legislation will allow us to empower law enforcement to be able to make those arrests right there when they're at that scene of the violation. I also feel that being able to implement electronic monitoring systems statewide, because this loophole has been closed, will have a tremendous impact on the safety of survivors throughout the state of Florida.
How will the no contact bill be enforced, even for those perpetrators already behind bars wishing to make phone calls? How will you know that they're not calling the victim?
I'll let Jeff answer that.
We actually have a very good system in place in Orange County, and have for some years, on monitoring inmates' phone calls. They're all recorded, so it would not be difficult to, if we get a hint that there's been contact or influence, to simply order the jail calls and identify. One of the unique things that we have in Orange County in corrections is we have people that are very, very attuned to that. They're able to pull the calls. Frequently what happens is an offender will call a relative who will then conference in the victim, so it's not direct. But the beauty of this new law is it will enable us to prosecute offenders even without victim cooperation, because you don't necessarily have to have a victim testify to prove that there was a violation of contact. So it's an additional tool in the tool belt, and we have found that using the domestic violence injunctions both as civil contempt and as criminal cases is very effective, and this is sort of adding another tool to that but allowing it to be used just based on what a judge does. Because as Carol said, domestic violence injunctions have to be initiated by a victim. And this way, the court will establish a no-contact order on the request of the state, and that will give it teeth regardless of the victim's cooperation, because we have found that separation between victim and offender are essential to any kind of successful criminal prosecution, and this just enhances that.
And question for Her Honor. Speaking on behalf of, the commission, but in addition to that, also the judicial system here, is there a sense of pride that what is now going to possibly become a statewide bill, it starts here in Orange County?
Certainly. The court system has been very proud to be a part of this Domestic Violence Commission. We've spoken today about just a few of the accomplishments that we've made. We'd keep you here all day if we tried to list all of the things that we've done. And the court system is extraordinarily proud and gratified to be a part of this process. It was through the leadership of the court system that the commission came into being, and we are happy about the improvements that we've been asked to make ourselves, which we've done, as well as the improvements that have been made on behalf of all of our community partners.
But knowing that you're not only going to make a difference here in Orange County, but now statewide, and as Carol was saying, saving lives all across the state.
Yes, Orange County is exerting leadership in this area, and that's a wonderful thing for those persons who truly are victims of domestic violence and survive it across the state. You're correct.
More questions?
It is, you mentioned this is the second time that it was proposed? These laws were proposed?
Yes.
What happened the first time that they were not approved?
We had difficulty in the House, but that's been remedied. But let me point out, too, as someone who served in the legislature, and won't escape most of you, that when the Senate sponsor is also the chairman of the Rules Committee, and with his seniority, it helps quite a bit. So we're looking forward to it this year. And but the House problem has been remedied with the right sponsor, so I'll leave it at that.
What are the next steps?
Next step, Senator?
We're going to, well, I had a small hand in the referrals to the committees for these bills. And so these bills will go through the committees in the Senate and in the House, and then we obviously will cooperate with the language, and then what will happen is hopefully it will go to the floor of the Senate, to the floor of the House, and then we'll send it to the governor. So we're looking forward to being able to work through the process over the next 60 days and be able to provide a successful resolution to these deficiencies.
And you hope for it to pass this year?
Absolutely.
That was a guarantee, I heard it. Write that down, it's a guarantee.
Actually, this question is for Jeff Ashton. You have trouble often with victims cooperating in the prosecution. How often is it because of these threats and intimidation from jail?
I mean, it's hard to know for sure because often it's silent. Anecdotally, I can tell you that my prosecutors think it's a big problem. You know, and it's not just the offenders calling, it's the indirect contact, which also could be addressed in this bill. There's a lot of pressure on domestic violence victims from sometimes their own families. So this will at least help alleviate some of that, and we're hoping to be able to enforce it.
And also for you, Jeff, the GPS aspect of it, we've had, issues over the last couple of years come up. Not only does this bill help domestic violence victims, but this is anybody who might have someone associated with GPS. This is across the board.
Sure. It kind of just fills in a gap, a logical gap in the law, and it really doesn't matter why you're under court order to be in GPS monitoring and home confinement. It ought to be treated the same regardless, and that's what this bill does. So that's the beauty of it.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Any more questions?
Could you all describe, I guess, the rampant issue of domestic violence here locally and then how it may compare statewide? Is it more serious here, or how have you seen it change over the years?
Central Florida has one of the highest rates of domestic violence in the state of Florida. We also have one of the highest rates of child abuse, and 80% of our child abuse cases are due to domestic violence. So when you include all of those cases, it's an epidemic problem. I mean, if we had an outbreak of flu at the same rate of survivors and children being exposed to domestic violence, the health department would be, up in arms, and we'd have schools locked down and all kinds of things happening. This is just very silent. It happens behind closed doors a lot of times. We don't know about it. We don't see about it until, unfortunately, we have either a really serious case or a mother and 2 children dead. And so that's why it takes literally the unprecedented cooperation of the people that we have here. Central Florida is unique nationally in the cooperation between the Domestic Violence Center, law enforcement, the courts, corrections, state attorney's office. This whole group standing behind me and quite a few others are just really instrumental in making sure that we address this problem. And really, I'm very happy to say homicide rates are down, which is really wonderful. We can't really judge by 911 calls because as we move into working with other law enforcement municipalities, Harbor House is now working with Ocoee and Winter Garden. I've had meetings this week with Maitland and Winter Park. You'll expect to see their 911 calls come up initially and then hopefully go down. But it continues to be a very serious problem.
Let me just also thank the Department of Corrections for being here, and also the Orange County Sheriff's Department. We work very closely with law enforcement, so we appreciate you being here. Any more questions? If not, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.